Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hi, mate. How you going?
Pretty good. So we've got a minor victory with regard to the war on cash, but we really haven't made any progress at all, really, have we?
No. I mean, look, some people have been jumping up and down for joy with the establishment of the Senate inquiry last week. I'm much more sanguine about the inquiry. So we know that Labor, was the big pusher in the establishment of the inquiry. It's unclear to me at this stage why did Labor decide to bring the inquiry forward. But remember, what we do know is that what the Senate passed was that there will be a reporting date in February next year. So Labor made it known to various parties in the Senate that they wanted this off the agenda for this year, and they wanted this to be delayed into 2020. So the committee, the Senate Standing Committee on Economics, have until February next year to come back with their inquiry report. So why is that significant? Because the government wanted this bill to come into effect on 1 January. So it looks like on the surface that is going to be delayed. Obviously, submissions are now, the inquiry has been formally established. Submissions are now open. Submissions will now be due by the 15th of November. And then after that point, there'll be a decision as to whether the inquiry wishes to hold hearings, who will be coming to hearings, and then obviously they will have to write a report. So it looks unlikely that this process will finish before 1 January, because obviously you have the inquiry, and then the actual both members of both chambers of parliament have to actually then vote on the legislation. So it looks like this is going to be a big issue for 2020. Now, I guess the question is, what was Labor's intent? Was it that they want to delay this because they want to embarrass the government next year and they actually do want to vote against the legislation? Or is it that there's too much heat on this issue now for Labor, and Labor wants people to be distracted, to cool down, go into Christmas, come back, think about other things, and then in the new year they quietly vote for the legislation? So unclear as to why the inquiry has been established the way it has, but so I don't think this is a positive or a negative development. I think it's just a development, and we just need to roll with the punches in terms of the next stage of the process.
Well, I guess there are 2 points worth making. Clearly, all of the submissions and the phone calls that people made, got some attention.
Absolutely.
So there's no doubt that actually helped to get us to this point. But, bearing in mind that the bill as it's now being redrafted is effectively somewhat different from the earlier version, right? Which I think is really important. We might touch on that in more detail. Means that you can't just sort of search and replace the submission that was made previously and assume it will have the same effect again, right? So there's a little bit more work to be done, I think, to really understand what the new bill is really driving at. And I guess that's going to be the work over the next few weeks as we begin to think of the journey between now and the middle of November when the submissions go in.
Indeed. So I think there's a few points to make. I think it's a mistake for people to take their submission that they would have put into Treasury and just submit that into the Senate, because, like you said, the bill and the exposure and the explanatory memorandum, they are different. Now, one of the things that I did do last week was I actually printed off the bill and the exposure draft that was put out by Treasury and the explanatory memorandum, and I did a line-by-line comparison, and there are some big differences between them that have to be accounted for, because the government is now arguing something completely new about the bill and what the bill, why they want this legislation in place. So that's point one that people need to consider when they put in their submission to the inquiry, because the inquiry will be looking at this from a slightly different lens to how Treasury looked at it. But the other point that I'm quite focused on is we have Senate estimates coming on the week of the 21st of October. During that week, there'll be an opportunity for senators to ask public officials from, say, Treasury, the Australian Taxation Office, and the Federal Police, who will have a role in policing this cash ban. There'll be an opportunity to put questions to them about this legislation, how this legislation may operate. From those questions, we may get new information that come out of that. So I'm doing more work on my submission but I won't be submitting until after Senate estimates just to see what comes out of that. So there'll be hopefully some news coming out of Senate estimates. But so I guess the key focus for people to understand about the bill that the government presented was what is the objectives of the bill. So why don't we just put this on the screen? So basically what I've put up here is Section 3 of the parliamentary bill versus Section 3 of the exposure draft put out by Treasury, and what the bill presented to Parliament says is, quote, the principal object of this act is to protect the integrity of the Commonwealth taxation system by preventing the use of cash in order to avoid scrutiny by the Commissioner of Taxation seeking to enforce the taxation law. A secondary object of this act is by adopting the same means, similarly to protect the integrity of other laws. So this is what the bill said. What did the exposure draft that put out by Treasury is, quote, the objective of this act is to prevent the use of cash in economic activities in order to avoid the scrutiny of regulatory authorities. Now, you could say that this is sort of semantics, but and to some degree that it kind of is, because regulatory authorities includes the tax office, but I think it's actually important they're saying that no, the principal reason for this cash transaction ban bill is about tax leakage, tax evasion. And again, this is not what Sukas told Alan Jones. He said that this was all about cracking down on criminal gangs. It's all about illicit activity, drugs, etc. That's the purpose of the bill. The bill itself says that's not the main reason. It's all about tax. And so if it is about tax, then the question for the public and for people like you and I is to, well, what evidence is there that the introduction of this cash transaction ban bill will actually impact the tax system? Now, one of the things that I found quite fascinating in the explanatory memorandum is that there's, like, I think on page 3 or 4, there's a statement of impacts about the bill, and there is a statement about financial impacts. And so what does it say in the explanatory memorandum on page 3? It says, quote, the bill is estimated to have an unquantifiable impact on revenue over the forward estimate. So, one of the key aspects that we in the government have to answer is that, so to bring this law, you take away freedom. It will actually cost money to implement this law, from the monitoring, from the surveillance, or whatever tactics you're going to use to actually crack down on this. So you'll actually have to deploy resources to enforce this law, and what's the cost of the enforcement, and how much revenue do you seek to achieve by raising? Now, they say we don't know how much revenue we're going to raise, and that on a cost-benefit analysis, I think that's a big problem. So even before we get out of the gate, the government says we're going to spend money to enforce this draconian law, but how much integrity will it bring to the system? How much additional tax can we get? We don't know. But on the other hand, is I don't think that the government will have the ability to explicitly measure how much additional tax revenue there would be by the enforcement of this law. So there are very big questions about, will this actually, what impact will this have on the tax system? Will it actually generate revenue? How much revenue? Is that revenue going to outweigh the costs? And these are some of the key issues that I'll be investigating over the next 6 to 7 weeks as I put my submission together, because I think there are some very big holes in the government's case about this law having a big impact on tax evasion.
Well, I guess the point there, John, is if the intent of the bill is crafted around the integrity of the tax system, right, then the question is whether the Senate will want to look beyond that at things like negative interest rates and the implications for the cash ban on those sorts of things, or whether they will restrict it purely to the question about the integrity of tax.
Well, of course, yes. So what would be the lens in which the committee looks at? So obviously, I'll be hitting all the key themes that we hit before around loss of economic freedom, no empirical evidence that this is going to meet the objectives, whether it's about illicit activity or about tax leakage, but also in terms of in terms of negative interest rates, which we know are coming, and obviously I think you put out a post on the DFA about in terms of Denmark. This Danish bank that you talked about on the DFA blog. I mean, look, it's like the canary in the coal mine about what's going to happen with negative interest rates. They started $1 million US in terms of bank balances. They've gone to 100,000. They could go lower, and obviously if we get into what the IMF is calling for, -4%, -5%. Official interest rates, well, we're going to see more of these examples coming out of like what's happening in Denmark right across the world, and that's obviously very relevant for what's going to happen in Australia with the RBA, with commercial banks. What's the demand for cash, and what freedom can you have in terms of cash? But the other point is about the integrity of the tax system. Well, again, who chaired the Black Economy Task Force? KPMG and the other big accounting firms, and for transparency's sake, I used to work for one of them. They have been at the forefront of picking holes in the tax system to benefit clients who don't want to pay tax. And so so tax avoidance, which is within the scope of the law, it is all legal. But there are obviously questions that the Senate and the government can ask to say, well, if this is really about tax and the tax system, should we have put one of the key architects around tax avoidance to chair the Black Economy Task Force? Because whether it's about money laundering or tax evasion, KPMG and some of the other firms have been at the forefront of that activity, and yet now they're the ones saying, okay, we need to strip people's freedom away because we need to protect the integrity of the tax system.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess there's one final point before we close this out, and that is that the digital dimension is also, of course, potentially in target here, isn't it?
Indeed. So now, what Parliament, or what the Minister Sukkar, Assistant Treasurer Sukkar, didn't present to Parliament was the regulation. So, and the fact that the regulation, it will be a revised regulation. So we saw the draft. But what we know is that the Act and the explanatory memorandum are different from the Treasury version. Well, I suspect that the exposure draft, so that the actual regulation that the government, that the minister seeks to bring forward, if the bill is passed by Parliament, is going to be different. So I think it's important that we see that there. But obviously, one of the things that we saw in the exposure draft put out by Treasury was that digital currencies was to be exempted. So what is digital currencies according to the definition? It's cryptocurrencies. So now, when I looked at the explanatory memorandum about digital currency, there was some very interesting new language in the version presented to Parliament that wasn't presented by Treasury in the exposure draft. And I've had some crypto people on the phone in the last 24 hours, and I said to them, there are some key sentences you need to be aware of. So just for the sake of the audience, so the key thing to look at is page 9, paragraph 1.31. So this is about digital currency. Quote, while digital currency is included in the definition of cash, given ways in which digital currency is presently used in Australia, it is expected that the Treasurer will exempt most transactions involving digital currency from the cash payment limit. This exemption is expected to continue until such time as the use of digital currency changes and it presents a material risk of facilitating the same source of avoidance of obligations currently facilitated by physical currency. So, Martin, that black highlighted part of the quote is the new part, and that's critical, because the crypto people so far have thought, well, we're exempted, we're safe. No, the government is now saying is, once crypto becomes effective as cash to avoid transparency, they're going to make crypto transactions illegal. Now, one of the things that they sort of said when you read the explanatory memorandum is that the problem the government apparently has with cryptocurrencies is that it doesn't establish a clear record of the transaction. So, for example, with the blockchain, you can see that one party transacts with another party, but what the government is saying is that these two parties on the blockchain who are transacting, we don't know exactly who they are. Whereas when you have a bank account, well, we know who you are because you've got to be fully transparent about who you are and what your details are. So that's the government's argument, and they're saying that, because here's the thing: if we go to negative interest rates, and then people are going to say, okay, I'm going to get out of the system. If cash is an issue, I'm going to start using crypto. I want to use Bitcoin or some of these altcoins to do my transactions. Some of these transactions could be above $10,000 transactions. Well, the government says, well, once crypto becomes that sort of effective, we're going to shut it off. And so again, if you've got digital cryptocurrency in a wallet, it's going to be digital junk, and the government's going to, by their own words, they're going to turn off this exemption at some point soon. And therefore, if you are big on crypto, if you're holding crypto, you need to be in this fight, because the government's coming after you as well as people like us who've got cash.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that the regulations can be changed without bringing it back to Parliament at any time, right? Pretty much by a stroke of a pen.
Yes. So that is true. But what the bill presented to Parliament and the explanatory memorandum makes clear is that any new regulation that's put out by the minister, there is an ability for the Senate to make it disallowable. So generally what happens is there's 15 sitting days in which the Senate has to make an instrument disallowable. But again, you need a majority of the Senate to make that. So if, for example, the government or the minister says, okay, we're going to make crypto included in this ban, you need a majority of the Senate to oppose the government's bill, oppose the government's move on that. And we already know that the Shadow Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones wants crypto a part of this anyway. So even if crypto is initially exempted, when they strike the pen, I don't think you'll have a majority of the Senate that's going to come to the rescue of cryptocurrency holders. And that's obviously a very big risk in this process as well.
Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate your time today and going through some of those important points. And I think, to emphasise again, the war is not over, right? This is definitely the next couple of months are going to be really, really important. And we'll come back to the viewers with some more thoughts as to how to develop those arguments further as we develop our own thoughts.
Of course, yes. So there's no time for celebration, no time for joy. Sorry, Robbie. People shouldn't be complacent. There's still a long way to go to defeating this legislation. The fight will go into 2020. I would urge people not to rush with submissions into the inquiry because the lens in which the Senate is now looking at this is different, because the bill is different, and so people need to study the bill, study the explanatory memorandum, and actually come with a thoughtful contribution in terms of what does the government claim that they are achieving. Because the only way we're going to win is by proving the government's case to be false, and the government's case this time around is slightly different from a couple of months ago when they first brought it out via Treasury.
John, thank you very much. We'll keep fighting.
Thank you.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.